Are employers really having this difficult time hiring people? Um, before we can even attempt to answer that question, we have to first be in agreement that there are many different forces at play here when it comes to getting the American people back to work. And as I kind of observe employers on the market and I observe and listen to some of their talking points and I observe a lot of the actions that they are taking, um, it's become abundantly clear to me that there are quite a few employers who don't understand that they are not in control, right? Um, there are certain aspects of the equation here that they do control, such as the individual jobs that they bring to the job market. But outside of that, they are not really the driving force, the main factor in the American people returning to the workforce, right? They can again control the individual jobs they bring to the market, but by and large, they don't control the other jobs that are on the market. They don't control job availability in mass. Um, they also do not control the feelings of safety that Americans have to feel in order to re enter the labor market. They do not control the level of security that Americans must feel either in themselves getting the vaccination or those they love getting the vaccination, or even if they don't plan to get the vaccination, they have to feel that vaccinations are going to be effective for other people to ultimately decrease their chances of getting COVID. And again, those are things that employers do not control. And, you know, we have seen in recent months, we've seen hiring rebound. We've seen that due to stimulus. We've seen it due to vaccinations. We've seen it just due to the fact that the economy in large is pretty much reopening. But when I listen to some of these arguments that paint a picture as if Americans are living high on the hog due to stimulus, that is a picture that is very much detached from reality. Because most of the stimulus that people have received, and we're not just talking about cash dollars, money, dollar bills, y'all. We're not talking about just that, right? People have received tax credits. People have received, or they've been able to take advantage of eviction moratoriums. There have been a whole host of things that have allowed people to stimulate the economy, right? People did not have to make payments on their school loans, and they were able to use that money in other ways to stimulate the economy. Again, it is not just people who received cash, who received deposits. Those weren't the only people stimulating the economy. But even that considered, most stimulus that we have seen is not stimulus that is sustainable for a decent quality of life. Specifically, if you're looking at, for instance, like the $1,200 checks that we saw, the $600 check, um, those were all one-time deals. Who in the heck, right? Our last stimulus payment that people received was, I believe, in February, March, right? March. If you are still living off of that now, that I want to let you know that is not the case for most Americans. Most Americans, they had that money and they stimulated the economy with it. It left their hands. Now, they chose to stimulate it in different ways, right? And we talked about this in Monday's episode, our most recent episode. There, if you look at it, there's a certain level of control that people wanted to have over how you spent the money that you were given by our government to stimulate our economy. That's what they want to complain about, right? But anywho, getting back to my point here, that $1,200 people got is gone, right? Even when you look at the extended unemployment benefits, sure, yes, they are getting an extra, $1,200 per month that they wouldn't normally receive for their unemployment. But when you look at that and you consider what it takes to live in the average American city, I'm not talking about New York, California, I already know all of you people are screwed, right? That barely did anything for you guys. But for other people where the cost of living isn't as high, that still was not enough. I think you're not going to find anywhere in this country where the stimulus that was received was enough for people to be living high on the hog, as is kind of the picture that a lot of people are trying to create here. And I want you to know that all of this boils down to what people believe about other people, right? They believe that the people getting these stimulus payments are lazy Americans. And it also boils down to what they are motivated by. They always think about this. They want to point out the motivation of the other side. They're not motivated to work, they're not motivated to this. But are they pointing out how they are motivated by a need for cheap labor? Why am I saying cheap labor? Why am I not just saying they have a need for employees? A lot of these people are in need of cheap labor. We'll talk about that momentarily. But I want to pose another question here to you. Why don't you hear the same being said about companies? Again, I just pointed out how they want to talk about the motivation of Americans, but they don't ever acknowledge their motivation, because everybody is motivated by something. If you're not motivated, you do not take any action. They are motivated to get on television and tell you that the American people is lazy and they don't want to work. The American people, they, just want, something. They're motivated for that. We'll talk about why. We talked about that a lot of it on Monday, but we're going to talk about it some more today. But why don't you ever hear about the same about companies? Didn't they receive stimulus? In a lot of cases, they received significantly more stimulus than your average everyday Americans. Why am I asking if if we've ever considered them in this equation? Well, not only did they actually receive stimulus, but if they're going to say that Americans who receive money are going to be less motivated to participate in the labor market, I could then turn around and say, you know what? Given the fact that we have a free market, and that's kind of what we've all subscribed to as Americans, and we agree it's totally awesome. Part of having a free market is a responsibility on organizations, on corporations to innovate, right? If you don't innovate, the free market will kill you. Your organization will die. Well, in my opinion, companies who are just handed cash, they don't have to innovate because they don't have to do anything to essentially meet the demands of the market. For instance, this is one thing I promise you, like, I'm being super, super honest and transparent here. Something that I had to kind of scratch my mind, or excuse me, scratch my head and think about a few times is, again, over the past year, we've heard time and time again about, oh, the Americans get money and they're not going to return to work. And da, 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 da. We heard all about that. We heard about how they should have been prepared for the pandemic. They should have had savings. We didn't hear about how the companies who, like, they literally do financial planning. Yes, Americans should be doing that too. But companies have more of a responsibility to do, because it's not just one single family that is depending upon that, right? It's their customers, it's each of their employees and their families that are dependent upon their financial health. And so if they don't do financial planning, there's much more of an impact, not just for a single family, but for a community, in some cases, our country at large, depending on the size of the company. We never talked about that. We also, in specific industries, for instance, we talked about, for instance, how um, some companies, some restaurants started doing curbside. Actually, quite a few did, right? Um, I'm sure some of them still got money. They got money, but also a lot of companies got money that didn't do curbside, that were restaurants. And that boggled my mind, because we didn't hold businesses to as high of a standard as we were trying to hold the average everyday American. Like, it is literally the responsibility of a company to innovate. It is literally the only way in a free market that you are going to be the go to for your target market if you innovate, if you meet their needs. But we're not having conversations around the fact that, well, we just gave them money and some of them didn't innovate. Some of them didn't decide to do curbside. Some of them didn't decide to maybe do online stuff that they could have done, even though they couldn't open in person. We didn't talk about any of that. We just wanted to say, damn you, Americans. That literally boggled my mind. So, in my opinion, if we just give them money, they're going to lack motivation. They're not going to be motivated to reopen if they can just say, well, I can sit on the sideline and get this money. And, I know as a business, it's hard to operate because you've got advertising and marketing. There's a lot of work that goes into trying to get customers. There's a lot of work that goes into trying to keep customers. So, I just do better getting a PPP loan. I just do better getting an EIDL grant. Like, right? We never once heard that. Never, 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 never. But we heard it time and time and time again about the people who lost their jobs through no fault of their own. We didn't even hear so much about the stories from people who, in their own direct experiences, interacted with employers who did not give a damn about protecting them during the pandemic. Now, was this all employers? No. But all you needed to do was find yourself scrolling across Twitter, looking in Reddit forums, and you would see not just a few, but many stories, many posts from people who worked at not employers where they never interacted with them, like people who worked in restaurants, right? You would hear and see posts about people who worked in restaurants having a boss who knew that somebody was sick but still wanted him in, who knew that multiple people were sick but still wanted to keep the restaurant open and expose the general public to COVID, knowing that they had multiple COVID cases at that location. But when did we ever hear about that? When? The reality is there are forces at work to control the consumer, right? They have, as I stated earlier, they're critical about how you personally decide to stimulate the economy. Absolutely critical of it. They're also looking to control the laborer. They want to force you to return to the labor market without considerations of your motivations. We all know, for instance, anyone who works in sales knows that the person you're trying to make a sale to has to be motivated in some way. Why is it that in this situation, even when someone goes to find a job and it's not a pandemic and it's just average times, right, they have to be motivated? Obviously, money is a motivation, but there are other things that motivate the individual. But here in this situation, we are not saying that some of the most important motivators matter. We're not talking about their feelings of safety and security. We're not talking about the trust that they have, not just in individual employers, but in employers en masse. Are things getting better in terms of the virus? Yes. Do we need to reopen? Absolutely. Are people still fearful of catching COVID-19 and some of these more contagious variants that we are hearing about almost on a daily basis at this point? Without a doubt. And that cannot be removed from the conversation about employers having a difficult time in hiring.